Hi guys, I'm Woodcraft Hamster and welcome to the next episode on my beginners wood carving series, and unsurprisingly today I want to talk about wood. And I have a selection here to have a talk about, but really it's two things I want to talk about today. One is what kind of wood can you or should you be carving, and two, where can you get it from? So to take point number one first, there are two types of wood, at least in my mind, for carving that you can use. There is green wood, which the sort of the real layman's explanation is fresh wood, and seasoned wood, which is generally dry wood. Now, dry wood is more commonly used in things like construction and building and furniture making and that kind of thing, and you can carve it. I do it all the time. All of this wood here I would consider as seasoned. Even this, which looks pretty fresh, this has been sitting in my workshop for probably close on to a year, and it is bone dry. And I will still carve with this. That's why it still sits in my workshop, because I will get around to making something out of this at some point. And there are pros and cons to both green and seasoned wood. Green wood is very easy to carve. It's generally quite forgiving. It's very, very forgiving on your tools. And it's generally nicer and more pleasant to work with. The downside is that because it's still wet, essentially, it still has moisture in it. When you've finished your carving, or almost finished, and you allow it to dry out ready for final sanding, there will be moisture trying to escape the wood fibres. Unfortunately, when that happens, sometimes the moisture escapes quicker than the wood can allow it, and the wood will split or crack or check. These are all varying terms to mean the same thing. Seasoned wood, on the other hand, doesn't have that problem, so you've got no issue with it splitting unless for some reason you decide to dunk it in a bucket of water. But the problem with seasoned wood is that it's very, very tough on your tool, can be very tough on your tools. It means you have to sharpen them more regularly, and it's just much harder to carve. And it depends on the type of wood. I mean, this is a piece of birch. I use birch almost exclusively because it's easily available in my area, and even seasoned, this carves relatively well. If I was using something like oak, it becomes almost kind of like concrete. It's very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult to carve, in my opinion, especially for a beginner wood carver. So those are the two types of wood. Now this, as I say, although it's seasoned, this is kind of what I would expect to see for something that is green. And then moving over, this is a piece of seasoned, I think this is 3x3 or 2.5 by 2.5 pine, and funnily enough, something very similar to this, it was actually, I think, a broken pine bed slat, but something very similar to this is what I used to carve my very first spoon. Now, it wasn't a very nice or a very pretty looking spoon, but that was more to do with my skill than it was the actual timber. You know, you could make a spoon out of this if you know what you're doing and get quite a nice little spoon out of it. You need to keep an eye out for things like knots, because things like seasoned pine used for construction and building generally generally has a lot of knots and that kind of thing in it, and that's not really something that you want. But you know, you can use this just as easily, so it just depends what's available to you. And the other two things I quickly wanted to show you, I've basically just got a sort of a semi-thick and a pretty thin little branch, or a stick and a branch, let's call it. And you can carve with these as well. A lot of people kind of just would overlook this. I make, where are we? I've got a little teaspoon here made out of one of these branches. And they're no frills, they're simple and they're functional, but you can carve with them. And again, the benefit being is you can chop down something like this while it's green, carve it, and generally speaking, you kind of hope that it's not going to split. I will do a separate video, I think, on kind of drying out green wood carving and that kind of thing, because it's something I've mentioned before and a few people have asked. But these are all things that you can use for wood carving. And then lastly here, I've got a giant lump of eucalyptus, and you can use this kind of thing as well. So really, there's not very much wood that you can't use for carving. And one thing I did mean to say is that with things like this, depending on where you're getting it from, you do need to be very careful that there are no screws, nails, fixings, etc. in something like this. If you've bought it directly from a DIY store or a wood merchant's as brand new timber, generally don't have too much of a problem. But if you've reclaimed it in any way, you do need to be careful, because the last thing you want to do is get the nice fine edge of your knife hit up against a screw or a nail, because that will leave you with hours worth of work to salvage it, if it's at all salvageable. So those are the types of wood that I would use. And now, as I say, I would much prefer to use green wood given the choice, but not all of us have access to it. Even myself, I have no green wood in my workshop at the moment, and the reason for that is that I'm still getting through a lot of this. I haven't been out recently to harvest any, and yeah, that's fine. It's not a huge problem for me. But other people don't have access to green wood, or they don't have access easily to kind of fallen trees or areas in which they have permission to cut down. What I should have said at the beginning of this video is, if you are going to go out and harvest wood, make sure you have permission first and foremost. Don't just rock up to your local woodland with a saw and a rucksack and help yourself. It's generally not considered the right thing to do, and you certainly don't have permission to do so. What I tend to do, I keep an eye out in the local area, especially after things like storms and things like that. If a tree's been blown over somewhere, especially if it's on private land, somebody's garden, for example, is always a really good example of this. Most people are generally quite happy if you were to sort of rock up and offer to assist them in kind of chopping it up into pieces so that it can be removed and taken away. Most people are quite happy to say, by all means, help yourself, take as much as you would like. Another really good resource for this is tree surgeons. I think I've mentioned this in other videos before. I've actually got 2 or 3 tree surgeons locally who I've bumped into, or I've taken the name down off their van because I've been passing but haven't had time to stop. And I tend to find that if you contact these guys and explain that you're a wood carver, you want access to some relatively fresh stuff, leave them your details, and if they're working in your local area, they'll either give you a call, or if they're passing you and they've got a couple of bits on the van, they might even leave some on your driveway for you. That's my experience. That's what's happened for me. And there's no reason why you can't offer to give these guys a couple of quid here and there if they've got something that might be useful for you. I think it's really useful to sort of form a relationship with people like this, especially if you're in an urban area where you don't really have that much access, because there's trees everywhere, but there are only a small number of people in urban areas who generally get access to cut them down. And what will happen, most tree surgeons will put them into a chipper in the back of their van and chop it all up and then sell it off later for garden mulch and these kind of things. And actually, it saves them a bit of a job. If they've got a couple of big chunks like this, and you say, do you know what, before you chuck that in your chipper, would you mind if I just throw it in the back of my car and take it away? You're actually saving them a job. So that's another really good way of trying to get hold of timber. And really that's it, guys. So I think I didn't want to ramble on too long for this episode, but there is not really any wood I can think of that I would come across in whether it was something like this, or something in between, that I wouldn't carve given no other choice. Now obviously we all have preferences, and I think most people in the wood carving world, maybe a few exceptions, would look at green wood as kind of like the holy grail, the best kind of carving wood available. Really, species is down to personal preference and what's available in your area. There are certain species of wood I would love to get hold of, but they're either not native to my area or not even native to the UK. And so be it. That is the case. And I'm not really willing to spend lots and lots of money trying to get things shipped from overseas. They're probably going to dry out, or maybe even have to be seasoned before they could be shipped over anyway. So I stick with what I know. Eucalyptus, you may have seen a couple of videos of mine using this. I'm not actually a huge fan of using eucalyptus, hence why I've got this big chunk still here. Birch, probably my go-to. I really like birch as a carving wood, and I think as a beginner's wood, if it is something you've got accessible in your area, I highly recommend it. Sticks and branches, don't overlook them. And one of the things I was going to say about this, guys, is that even things like this, if you're new to wood carving and you've got, you're out walking your dog and you find a couple of sticks on the ground, or you see that the local forestry people have been out like cutting down trees and things, and they've got a lot of this kind of stuff just lying around on the floor. Pick it up, take it home, use it, carve it. using things like this and is really helpful to understanding the grain of the wood, understanding how it works, how certain cuts will let you do certain things, and also how certain cuts will stop you doing certain things. That's not really the best example, but you know, there are certain woods that I know if I try and do a big kind of levering cut to try and remove quite a lot of material, I'm just going to break off a big chunk of material. I know that other woods really like that, and I can remove lots and lots of material really quickly and really accurately, because I know that things like birch is not going to split on me. If I try doing the same thing with pine, I'm just going to get chunks of firewood and matchsticks all over the place. So I hope that was useful, guys. Happy to answer any comments or questions you might have about wood type, wood choice, that kind of thing. And I hope you'll all join me next time. Cheers, guys.